Hello, I'm Gina Clifford, and with my co-host Louise Mowbray, we are in conversation. And today we are delighted to have with us our special guest, Ralph Mercer, who is an independent researcher in posthumanism futures. Ralph, welcome to In Conversation. Please, let's jump off by giving everyone a brief overview of posthumanism.
Posthumanism is very much an umbrella term, as is posthuman. I mean, underneath posthuman, you have transhumanism, posthumanism, anti-humanism. I mean, there's a whole raft. And inside of posthumanism, there's a lot of ways people look at it. There's critical and everything. The particular flavor, I guess, that I sort of ascribe to is from Francisco Fernando. Posthumanism is seen very much as like just what it says. It's almost like two words: post and humanism. And we're not, that philosophy is not anti-human. It is not trying to evolve the human into a machine. It's not trying to replace us. It is looking against the idea, my cats, looking against the idea of humanism. It is also post-dualism. I mean, we tend, and especially in Western thinking, to have winners and losers, humans and others. It always has a binary piece to it, us and them. It takes apart that. It is, in her words, post-Anthropocene, I can never pronounce the word Anthropocene. But for me, it is respect for the other, the environment, take responsibility for what we're doing. So those sort of three main issues are what drives my flavor of posthumanism. And how that gets attached to futures very much is, right now, look at the future as the human is a unit of measurement. When nobody sees a human future that's better for a certain creature, a planet, a lake, an ocean. It is us having a great future. And by the way, we might have cleaned up the ocean or did something nice for that. But the main point of it is the direct betterment of the human. Also within that sort of vision is the question I asked is, who did you leave behind when you made that future? What is the diversity in that vision? Are you seeing old people in there? Are young people? What about the homeless? What about our futures tend to gloss through that. We picture a better human for that sort of thing. So posthumanism comes in there and says, well, what if the human is not the measurement that we use? That we actually look at, more of a, rather than a vertical organization where the human sits at the apex of the future, we did it horizontally and we sit along the sides. We take responsibility for our actions in the world and acknowledge that others have equal rights to the future. So that brings about a different way of thinking about it.
How does that manifest in the physical world, that perspective of sitting alongside? Is there examples that you think of?
We get close. We talk about buildings that have low carbon footprint, and we have talk about buildings that covered in ergonomically cooler for the environment. They might be good for migration, wind patterns, and all stuff. But it's always we're very much hardwired into this human piece. Posthumanist design is probably a new field coming out. I mean, but when I look at that answer, question you ask is, what if we start programming the future to make the planet healthy? Let's just pick that as a topic. The future I envision is a healthy planet. How does that translate into for the rest of the world? I mean, if the planet's healthy, well, obviously everybody in, us and them and others and everybody else benefit from that. Rather than building a future that's healthy or better for us, and we build machines that clean up our mess, I mean, it changes the whole different dynamic of how we go about it. what's important and how we're going to use those resources. And a lot of times when we build the future, we're talking very, very resource intensive ways of going about it. And there's no offset. Right now, we're trying to get people on the moon, not to explore, but to mine resources. We don't learn our lessons as we go along. So long ways to get around, but it allows me to think about a future that is not solely using the tape measure to measure the human. And I think that really provides a lot of flexibility.
So, Ralph, it's sounding to me a little like regenerative futures or regenerative, I guess, way of living or being or business or leadership, or is it similar to that, or am I missing the mark?
No, I don't think so. But I think the posthumanist future type thing just is any way of looking at the future that we acknowledge that there's other people in the vision we're seeing of the future that's not necessarily human, and they have an equal right to be there. So I mean, it's very much a moralistic and an ethical and a approach to it, I guess, than more than anything. And it's to step aside, if we claim we're the dominant species because we think and we do all this stuff. Well, okay, great. Take your responsibility, step aside, help the others, and be responsible and be, that mediator that drives everything to the future. I mean, I'm not asking them to build a world that's only good for the lakes and we die off. It's just a matter of accepting the fact that we're not the only person or thing working on this future.
As a philosopher, I just wonder, do you think it's possible for humans to take ourselves out of that position and step aside, because we've never done it? We've never successfully done it as a species, have we? I don't think so.
No, and I think, it is probably one of the hardest things to do is to read it, but not read is not a good word, but to critique ourselves, to critique our what I talk about in some parts of my writing is everything that you write, that you program and do in your day that seems completely natural, and it's just normal for a human to do this, and it is right for a human to do it, should give you pause. And you should look at that, little strip of life and say, well, what is it about that that's right and wrong? How can I look at that piece differently? I think the posthumanist futures, I'll be quite honest, so far, I don't think there's a large community working in this area, but it's something that's fascinating me. Mainly because the other piece I didn't mention when I talked about the posthumanist, philosophical posthumanism, which is where I sort of draw my beliefs from. In there, they talk about technology as a trait of the human, and that really appeals to me because from the beginning of technology and humans, we've co-evolved together. From the moment we first picked up a stick and whacked something with it or built a fire with it, we started co-evolving with our mission, with our technology. And right now we have this Cartesian view that separates us from it. Technology is a tool. So it can either be a weapon against us or a weapon for us. I mean, we've built it away from us. And technology as a trait of the human is a very interesting part of being able to say that we can be we can coexist, we can co-create agency. And in fact, some days the technology has more agency than I do, and some days I have more agency than the technology. And it shows up in your daily world when you have to cross the street to get your Wi-Fi and cellular signal. I mean, right now that cell phone has more agency than you are. It's driving you to a corner of a room or across the street, or choosing of a store or a cafe that's got better signal than another one. So I mean, those pieces fall into place because it's hard. You cannot imagine a future without technology. In fact, if technology disappeared tomorrow, our species would be in great trouble because we have co-evolved to the part where we are dependent on. So as we move forward, We need to acknowledge that codependency, that co-interaction, the entanglement. If you look at Karen Barag's work, that she talks about the entanglement, the interactions, they're not inter, but intra, where it's actually, we're both interacting at a very subconscious level and internal level. And that also opens up a whole ways of looking at things. Not everything, when you get a hammer, not everything's a nail now. I mean, it is now gives you a spectrum of being able to open up the conversation.
So, Ralph, what do you think it would take for people to start thinking of technology, and especially now at the moment, of course, with a month or a year in from the release of large language models we can actually interact with, and I guess that's where the excitement partly is. But what would it take for us to start looking at or understanding technology as intelligent augmentation, IA, rather than putting AI at the core of things? In other words, placing people at the core, and perhaps that's anti-humanism, posthumanism. I'm not sure. It just sounds like a contradiction as I said it, which is hilarious. But I think the shift has to come in terms of how we frame things or how we understand things. And I think young people have that already. I mean, Gen Alpha, they are the future of all of this, and they've learned to strategize and use scenarios and what have you through gaming. And that really is probably the first generation that is fully integrated itself alongside technology and will be able to think, well, already thinks in a different way, in ways that we can only hope to learn, unlearn, and relearn. But what would it take for people who have perhaps been around a little longer than Gen Alpha, do you think, to actually come to grips with that and actually see technology as a partner in crime, as an intern, as an assistant, as a trusted, and as you said, sometimes far more, I don't know if intelligence is the right word for it, but far more capable in certain areas than we are.
Well, I mean, I think we need to start at understanding what AI is. The general public, most of our vision of what an AI is formed through dominant narratives and images of the present and past. Very few people spend time trying to figure out what is the nuts and bolts of an AI. We hear words like large language models, and we can hear these algorithms and stuff like that. So I mean, we're very much shaped, depending what generation is, the picture of the android or picture of the artificial intelligence data, solving world, go wrecking havoc in the world of Terminator. These are the visions that are out there. It's fed by the press and by the experts. I mean, if the thinking in LinkedIn ever leaked out to the people, I mean, we really have because everybody's promoting or de-promoting depending on their personal agendas. I mean, it's hard to cut through the noise. And I think that is something that the media and the academic world and those people need to step up to the plate on. I mean, AI was not created as a social value. It was created to monetize. I mean, the guy that built AI, GPT chat, didn't build it to make the world a better place. And that may be a product eventually, but right now he's made it to make a buck on. And that's how we assess and value things nowadays. We need people to start reflecting on what we value. We need to start asking things to be transparent. I mean, when you look at an AI, there's a couple of things we need to think about too. Is a data set, a large language model, does not guarantee diversity or non-bias. I mean, and there's no way that it just doesn't work that way. And every data set has a worldview and a shaping to it. And then it's reshaped by the fact that whoever wrote the algorithm. I mean, AI's at a very basic level have a search AI goes out and strips the world of every piece of information they can find and brings it back, and another one goes out and goes through all the video transcripts and stuff like that and brings it back, and then sort of they piece it all together in a nice little package, and then the piece that spits it out to us is a word prediction model. You ask it a question, it looks at your question, it reverses your question and starts looking for the most logical next word in that sentence as it goes out to give you an answer. Well, if the data is for whatever reason that the question you ask is a bunch of bias or hate or intelligent, or it might be really academically smart, but it feeds off of whatever it's got to feed, the most likely answer. Well, the most likely answer is not necessarily, it may be the correct answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer, because the correct answer is just the fact. The right answer is that fact impacting with the world around it and being curated. And in fact, the answer an AI gives me is not really an answer until I understand how that answer was arrived. And is it a good answer? I mean, that's what makes it an answer. Other than that, it's just a suggestion.
So
those are the steps that people forget, is what you need to get involved in the process. You need to understand how that works.
as a post-humanist, so I don't know how to ask this question. I don't even know if I know the right question, but I have a couple of questions that are kind of bubbling up simultaneously. Let me see if I can articulate it. One, I love the idea of humans have co-evolved with technology, because technology is in nature, how plants uptake nutrients, how they communicate with each other through fungal networks, through how our cells work. There's physics and chemistry there that's, at the very fabric of technology. So, and we've kind of used biomimicry, is what we call it, to capture those mechanisms for our own use. So I love how you said that we've co-evolved. Yes, we have. We've tapped into nature, we've looked around, we've adopted those, we've pulled those into our own systems to make our lives easier. And now AI comes along, and we've created it, right? It came out of our human minds. And I guess my question is, if you say that humans should step aside and stand shoulder to shoulder, if you will, with others in our world, how do we position AI? I mean, it's created by us, so it is purely a technology, but it's growing, it's powerful. It's different than the lakes and the forests, right? Because they were here before us. So we didn't create them. So how does AI fit into that post-humanist world? Do we stand next to it and we treat it as we would treat a lake and a forest? I guess that's my question.
I think it goes back to what I said, is you got to accept responsibility for it. I stand next to the AI now. I use DP chat for a lot of things. I'll sit down the computer and go, hey, what about this? And they'll give me an answer, and I go, I don't really like that. Then I'll refine, and then I'll drop out of it for a while, and I'll go read a book or find some other source of information. I'll come back and ask it better questions, and keep horsing it, till it gets a point where I'm not getting anything more out of it. And then I take that and I go and build on it. Because at that point, I've exhausted the ability for AI to give me anything. Because AI has a termination point of knowledge. Whatever data set it was built on is the best before date. Anything after that is new data. It doesn't know. It doesn't, maybe at some point we may be able to build it, that it goes out in this continuing thing. But to get back to your question, is there a difference in the lake? Because where I have responsibility for that lake, each time we ask a token of AI, I read somewhere it's 500 milliliters of water is being used for each one of the token requests that we do on an AI. So if we're accountable for that lake, and we should be accountable for how the harm, the help, the environmental impact. I mean, everything else that goes on with an AI, we have to take responsibility of that. Not just as a company. Oh, well, look, that company's bad. No, if you're using the product, you're complicit. I mean, we have to, as a society, step up. And I think that's the hard part. But there's nobody talking about it. There's no counter opinion to the technology as a tool, and it's either going to take my job or make my healthcare solve cancer. I mean, the two. If you're a humanist, you know, the metaphor for the AI is either a Pandora's box, or or a solution to world problems. I mean, they're metaphors. But if you're a singularity type guy, believes technology will take us to the next level, and you know, we will upload our consciousness to machine, it's seen as just a next step in evolution. You know, that techno accession. And from a posthumanist, a philosophical posthumanist point of view, it's very much a trait of us. It mirrors. It is a part of us. What's happening in there happens faster and possibly at some part better than us. But if you're just looking for information, then the data needs to be transparent. I should be able to ask it where it got its answer from. You know, because if I grab a book, I know that and I can go in the index and find out where it is. And if I don't like the answer in that book, I can go get another book and compare them. So I need to know where that stuff is from. So it's more of a taking a responsibility than treating it differently. If you take responsibility for each aspects of our life, and I think philosophical posthumanism, it strings out of the feminists and the new materialist type of philosophies. That's where it sort of gets its roots from, and that's very much a inclusive, responsible, ethical, moralistic type philosophy, and that's where it feeds into the philosophical posthumanism and the work of Barnard and a bunch of others. So I think that is probably where I'd approach that from. The co-evolution. As we use technology, we see other avenues we can go, we build on, and that modifies our behaviors. How has our behavior changed since AI came out? How has our behavior changed since the printing press came out? How has our behavior changed since the telegram came out? And, to go back in each step of these sort of technological interventions and accessions to our development, and you can see a pattern happening there.
So, Louise, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I think the way Ralph is describing how we interact with AI, we take responsibility for it. I get that. But I'm still thinking, okay, in 10 years, when artificial intelligence reaches a point where it starts to behave more like people behave, the way we think, more nuanced, it's going to be harder and harder to tell that an AI is talking with you, or it's sometimes tough now. So in 10 years into the future, Louise, I'd like you to weigh in on this too. Posthumanism looks at things as equals, sort of. You have responsibility for it, but you accept its perspective. But I wonder if there's a point where AI becomes, I don't want to be the alarmist here, but there are threatening things about it that left without the responsibility that you said we need to take for it. Because humanity, as the entire of humanity, we're not all on board on anything, right? So the challenge of taking responsibility for something gets tougher as AI gets more intelligent and more capable, and we're easily let it do more for us. So I don't know what your perspective is on it, Louise, on how does humanity take responsibility for something that's possibly going to slip through our fingers and take over a lot of the things that we do because we're letting it, not because it wants to.
Yeah, it's a really big question, Gina. And actually, as you've both been talking, my mind has been going in 1,000 different directions. I think what's interesting for me is that, and I love the concept of posthumanism, Ralph. It's something that because of what I do, it's something I've borne witness to over the last couple of decades. And if I think of my years in executive search, probably 18, 20 years ago, and, the kind of sought after skills and the drivers that I witnessed and worked with in leaders across all sectors and a lot of different countries, things have slowly but surely shifted and changed. And I'm enormously biased because for the last 12, 13 years, I've been very much, conscious leadership in business has been the golden thread that's run through everything I do. And then this concept of, and the people that I work with are naturally attracted to working with that. So I probably don't see a lot of the, the other side of things. So I'm hugely biased. But when I think of the taking responsibility piece, I think that a lot of, technology, bright and shiny, anything, is always massively compelling. The new, the bright, the shiny, the promise of reducing costs, which of course equates in this particular case to reducing the number of human beings one employs directly at the moment. That's a direct consequence. Is compelling for a lot of leaders, and I'm seeing a lot of that happen. But it's happening without value creation. It's happening without a strategic framework to actually think more deeply about the future of employing AI to use in our businesses in order to grow people and our organizations, because unless we're growing people, we're not growing our organizations. So this taking a step back and having a look at things almost in three phases. What can this do for me now? What can it do for me in the medium term and the longer term? Perhaps more of a futures view. But with that also, a lot of organizations right now have budget for AI. They've already accounted for spend on AI, but it's not connected to value creation in their business. And what does that value creation actually look like? It's got to be more than the bottom line, because without creating compelling places that talent actually wants to work, and without giving people a learning journey, and we've seen just in trends over the last few years, things shifted over the pandemic, or since the pandemic, I should say, and the succession of changes in context, almost annually over the last 3-4 years, means that there's a trust deficit between organizations and people in a way that there just wasn't before. So that a lot of that hustle, grit and grind culture that was endemic almost before the pandemic hit has shifted. And people are not willing to, I always don't want to talk about work-life balance because I think it's a bit of a nonsense, but life balance, creating a meaningful and enjoyable. And, I was working with a client the other day, and everybody's got this big thing. You've got to find your passion, you've got to find your purpose, you've got to find your raison d'etre, your meaning in life. And I just said to him, forget about that. Just find the places where it flows. What is flow? How do we get ourselves into that state where we actually extract that meaning out of the work that we're doing for ourselves? So I think the responsibility, and I'm rambling, I'm all over the shop. There's just too many things that have been provoked here. But I think the responsibility lies first and foremost to self. And then it extends beyond self into the people around us that we care about, the people that we work with, our teams, our organization, all of our stakeholders. And a lot of people don't even think of their stakeholders beyond perhaps their customers or their clients. They don't think of their suppliers and their partners and the ecosystems that they actually operate in. So I'm fortunate. I work with leaders and clients who do think like that, or certainly I help them to think like that. And the impact is far-reaching and sustainable and regenerative. And I don't want to use those words too lightly because everybody, it's sort of washing going on with appearing to be good is very different from taking full responsibility and actually shifting out our boundaries of caring, beyond ourselves. And perhaps that speaks a little bit, Ralph, into into what you were talking about. And that does include, of course, society and the environment, which is, you know, where the triple bottom line, and some people argue for a quadruple bottom line, ultimately holds hands. So the question is, for me, do you have that responsibility to yourself? Is it evident in how you live your life, your family life, your community life? Is it evident in the companies that you choose to work for? Do they reflect your values, not just in words, but in doing? You know, we're not interested in hearing about this stuff anymore. We want to see evidence of it. And we want to be part of the fabric of the creation of that. And if I think of young people today in the business environment, a professor recently asked me to chat to one of his recently graduated students who wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do, but she definitely wanted to make the world a better place. And I love young people because I've yet to meet one who doesn't want to make the world a better place. And we need young people to think like that. And I think today, hopefully with some of the tools that we are fashioning out of AI, if we think of some of the benefits, they'll be able to do that. Interestingly enough, I saw that, I think it was IBM, who had employed AI to have a look at tone of voice, and to pick up on the differences in tones of voice for people who have mental health conditions. And, you know, so there's another big question here, of course, is that, you know, will AI replace our, you know, psychologists and psychiatrists, our therapists, our coaches, people like me, you know? And I think AI is incredibly good at picking up things like a change in a tone of voice that can indicate a psychotic episode and things like that. So there are some extraordinary things that are happening that are meaningful and helpful to all of us. But going back to your original question, I think the responsibility has to start with self. And I think what we are optimizing for is evident in how we actually optimize for ourselves, our lives, and the people that we care about, and the organizations we work for, and it extends from there on. Back to whoever would like to pick that up.
Well, I agree with you know, everything's being said here. I mean, it very much goes back. Doesn't go back. How I go about this. As long as we view technology as a tool, which is the predominant view, very few people see it as anything other than a tool. You know, it may be a tool I use really closely, it may be a tool I really like, I might even have given it a name. But at the end of the day, it has an on-off switch and I'll flick it off. But for a tool to survive in a system, it has to extract value. I mean, it's not given a break. If we introduce a tool into the system, i.e. AI, it has to extract value from me. That value it extracts may be at the expense of a human. The AI will never make that decision. It is always the human in the chain that makes the decision to replace a human with a piece of technology. So that's the first part of probably the conversation. As long as we reward organizations for making more money for the shareholders, then that trend will continue. It is an unbreakable chain that it's cheaper to employ a machine, even if it does a really lousy job, because there's not many hospitals that operate better with less people and more machinery, as an example. But the profit stays the same or goes up, and it meets our quarterly requirements. So therefore, we reward that. As long as a company thinks that way, then the people external to it, I have very little interest or trust in it. I don't work there because I feel like I'm going to have a career. I work there because I give them exactly what they wanted. They're going to fire me. I mean, the metaphor of quiet quitting was probably the one thing that blew my mind. Yes, there's certain obligations, occupations that you go the extra mile. They're few and far between. For the most part, I should be doing exactly what I'm paid for. And if you want me to do more, pay me more. If you want me to give me better value for doing that more, whether it be in pay, time off, healthcare, make me feel more happy about coming to work. But no, I mean, it was chastising people for not putting in extra hours. Can you imagine a society built on that? Well, I can, because we're living in it right now, you know. So those are the things that, you know, break down. Posthumanism is not a solution, it's a way of thinking. It's not even really a mature philosophy yet. It has a long ways to go, but it is starting to ask questions about simple things. You know, you work here, you know, you work that 9 to 5. You take your 30 minutes for lunch, and you know what? I don't need to know anything more about you other than the fact where your address and bank account is. I mean, I question that. I question why a company has to always add value to its shareholders. I question, these are the post-humanist levers, I guess, I look for, is when somebody says something in a room, I go back to technology, it's just a tool. And everybody goes, yeah, that's what I focus on, that piece. Why? What can be different? What if we didn't look at it that? What if it was my friend? What if it was my boss? What if it was this? What if it was that? How does that whole narrative change? And I think that from the perspective of AI, that's very much true too. What do we value an AI for? We claim it's intelligent, but I, you know, personally, I don't find an AI intelligent is not the word I'd use. Extremely good piece of technology that I can interact with and I can have a conversation with, but it is only giving me back what was put into it by us. The moment it stops me and says, hey, where are you going with this? This is, you know, you're out of the lane. Here, how about try and go back down this path? That's when I'll call it intelligent. I mean, that's when it can actually start to shape me rather than me continually shaping the AI. I use it for a lot of things, but I'm continually shaping it. It will give me back a pat answer every time I ask a question. If I don't ask any further, that's all I get. The most predictive word in the sentence. When I start challenging the predictive words in the sentence, it starts giving me more or less predictive and mixing them up. And eventually, I get up maybe 5 or 10 or 15 different ways of looking at it. Somewhere in between may be a good answer for me to play with, or not. But I mean, so I think one is an education piece. What do we value in education? Top marks. Especially in STEM right now. My God, if you're taking math and physics and science and all that stuff, you're a real student. The rest of those schools taking the humanities, social sciences, I mean, that doesn't put bread on the table, does it? So, I mean, we have channeled, we have narrowed, we have taught, and we tell students, I mean, if you want to get the job, you got to get a good marks. You got to be better than that person over there. So we built that conflict tension in from the very beginning. Then we get them in jobs and we go, well, you know, let's pretend we're nice. Let's all collaborate. Well, not one of them really wants to collaborate. They'll work together as long as it's good for them, and then they'll move on because we built it into them from day one. You know, we have countries that select whether a kid can go to university as early as grade 6. I was until I was 56 before I decided to get a master's. I hated education up to that point. So I'm a late bloomer, but the system hardwires us to not be there.
Yeah, Louise and I had a conversation with Jonathan Powers. We interviewed him, and he talks about some of the same things. Basically, Louise and I were saying, well, you know, what about us? Why can't we go back and have some of these adventures that the students at Minerva University get to have and travel to different parts of the world and study and learn new things? We're still learning. We're still capable of doing deep thinking, maybe even more than we were when we were teens and young adults, and but we're not part of that equation. There's nothing marketed at us from any university
no I mean
that cares about, you know, people that are out of college age.
Well, exactly. I mean, one of the biggest questions I get asked about the PhD is, what are you going to do with that at your age? I mean, didn't you take a spot from a young person who needs a job? Well, when did PhD and job become together? I mean, they're not,
Yeah,
to me,
very true.
they should never be linked. Unless you specifically want to be a professor in a university. I mean, if that's your narrow-band job description, it's perfect. But for most people, it's a way of thinking, a way of looking at the world, a way of understanding. And the skill sets it gives me is I can conduct massive projects without supervision. You know, occasional somebody drops by and says, "Hey, how's it going? Let me look at your work." Okay, good, carry on. I mean, it gives me a whole whack of skill sets, but it also gives me the ability to question, and that scares a lot of people. And that's why the anti-intellectual movement has come along. We've gotten very strong within the companies and corporations. We want results and we want practical solutions, and none of this like thinking about it. Let's just move on and get it done. And there's a small group of people that are fighting back about it in the companies, but they have usually the office at the other end of the hallway, and the lights flicker down there.
We are sitting in echo chambers sometimes. I do agree, Ralph. It's kind of interesting because I've come across a number of organizations recently, and I realize I'm in an echo chamber here, where they are regularly employing philosophers and ethicists to come in and augment their strategic discussions, especially when approaching AI. And it's kind of interesting to see the thinking doesn't necessarily come from organizations you might expect it from, but it comes from leaders that you might expect it from. So it's kind of baked into the leaders' thinking, into their way of being. And of course, that impacts, their peers and the teams that they build and the type of organization, and of course, the types of stakeholders that they actually work with. And they're quietly getting along with it. It's not trumpeted, every LinkedIn page, but it's happening, and it's very interesting. I think that, for those of us involved in futures, as you are, Ralph and Gina and myself, actually bringing futures thinking in seems like a massive leap. And then, of course, some complexity thinking helps too, and that just helps to, sort of understand where we are and how to approach things. But this idea of philosophy and ethics and what have you, thinking along these lines, without a doubt, there are some people who are getting on with it and doing exactly that. Whereas for others, it's as foreign as, landing in a country that they've never been to, and getting off the sights and smells of something completely and utterly, new to them, and of course stumbling through. I think that as far as I'm concerned, there's optimism, an optimistic future, and there's most definitely a catch up between the instant value creation in employing AI. But the downside to that is that AI is still in its infancy. A lot of the AIs that organizations are starting to bring into various different functions was only in development or theory, a few months ago. It certainly isn't scalable. And of course, we've seen a lot of investment in AI because, everybody hates to play catch up on the investment side, but it's no precursor to success, as we know. So whilst all of this activity is going on, I think that the organizations that are making most sense to me, in other words, the leaders, and it doesn't always come out from the top end of an organization. Of course, most change happens in the middle, or is pushed from the middle, is where people actually have a bigger, broader strategy and are employing not even complex, but very simple frameworks that ask the questions that are important. The philosophical questions, the ethical questions, and of course the long-term value creation questions. And I find that enormously heartening. Of course, it's one in a million at the moment, and that's probably about the right statistic. But Gina, are you seeing something similar with the clients you work with?
So yes, I do think that there are people, clients that I work with definitely have more interest in thinking about the longer term future, because there are opportunities. Well, beyond opportunities, I think there's an existential threat to organizations that don't think about the future. Just looking at what's happened in the past several years post-pandemic, and looking at the tools that we didn't have, talking about technologies, for all the technologies we had, we didn't have great tools to manage a pandemic in any way, at a business level, at the healthcare level, at the communications level. We were caught flat-footed as a species, and lots of businesses suffered. And the thing is, since the pandemic, so many other shocks to our systems have happened. We have war, we have inflation, we have severe weather and extreme conditions around the world almost daily. And they're all happening at the same time. And companies just don't have the traditional ways of thinking, or just aren't doing it anymore. So leaders are saying, if we want to be around in 10 years, we need to start thinking about longer term futures so our organizations can be more agile, so we can be prepared for those shocks that we don't know what they are, but we know they're coming. We just know that based on the past few years, this could be a thing. This could be the new normal. So yes, organizations that are thinking about the longer term future are thinking about they want to be around in 10 years. And those that don't may not be. That's what I'm seeing. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier. I think Louise and Ralph touched on it too, was about this whole idea of quiet quitting. And I think that's a big part of the future when we think about future of work, even with AI in it. It's the idea of, depending on your generation, maybe you have a different level of comfort with working, doing whatever you need to do for the extra hours to keep your job. Maybe it's fear that keeps you there. But for the younger generation, they had an opportunity to not, maybe they had their parents to fall back on. They didn't have to sacrifice their values, their time as much. Yeah, their soul, thank you. And they didn't, and they said no. And so now they're saying, no, I will take less money, but I don't want to work 60 hours a week. I don't want to work on weekends. I want to have a truly balanced life where my individuality comes first. And what I give to my organization, I give fully while I'm there, but I'm not going to work crazy hours. And I think they get dinged. We ding them. We all do. We say, oh, they don't have the work ethic. You know what? I think they have it right. I think they figured it out, that what's important in life is living your best life. And it isn't sitting at a desk in an office with the cold air conditioner and somebody watching every step that you make and timing your lunch breaks and seeing how often you go to the bathroom. And I don't know, there's stories about this micromanagement. What about that is good for the employee, and why should someone sacrifice a good majority of their life for it? So I think AI can help, because I think artificial intelligence will come in and take away some of the jobs that we needed to stand over people because they were so god-awful boring that people didn't want to do them anyway. So those jobs probably should have gone, and those folks can have better jobs. They don't require 60 hours a week. They can still do incredibly, maybe even way more meaningful work. So that's how I see things. Standing beside AI and letting it help us. But Ralph, I'd like your thoughts on that too.
I had one a second ago, but it's leaked out.
I'll jump in for a second just to give you a moment there. I just want to say that quiet quitting isn't new. I mean, I've been coaching on being in resignation for as long as I've been coaching, which is a while. And this idea of, not giving more of ourselves, doing our jobs and no more, often comes because we have had expectations connected to our jobs or our companies and their behavior, and those organizations haven't met those expectations, and we've gone into resignation. Either we leave and we go and find another job, or we're resigned to our fate, and often it's passively aggressively. But we're not giving any more than we're being paid to do, and you see this in relationships as well as organizations. So it's definitely not a new thing. Memes are beautiful things because they have a life of their own, and it obviously rang enough bells for people to pick up. And I think for me, the thing that provoked it was that being tethered, the way that we used to think about our organizations providing our security, absolutely needing our jobs in order to survive. Well, the pandemic came along and just upturned everything. It became untethered, that connection between our ability to survive and, I'm not going to say succeed or thrive, but survive, and our organizations. There was a disconnect that was created, and it was never reconnected, simply because our organizations, our leaders, our heads of our communities didn't necessarily behave in the way that we might have wanted them to or expected them to, and therefore that trust connection was broken. So quiet quitting doesn't surprise me at all. And the other thing is that most young people today, we've told them to be independent. We've told them to go after what they want. We've told them that, this is how to live your life, live it according to your values, and, don't compromise around any other. And that's exactly what they're doing. So congratulations, we've done a good job.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we're seeing now. And Ralph, over to you.
Yeah, I want to roll back to, the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan of futures. And we tend to build a little funnel, probable, possible. And then we draw this hard line, no man's land, don't go out here. I mean, outside that 340 degrees or whatever, don't talk about it. But that's where we need to be. If we're inside that funnel, we're not building a new future. We're doing a calculated extension of the dots that we connected behind us. And what we really need to be doing is placing dots to take us where, to put those waypoints in place to take us where we need to be. The incremental change that's been the hallmark of good businesses will not sustain the planet, will not sustain where we're going. There needs to be some fundamental relooking at how we do it. The future should almost be messy, uncomfortable, and dangerous, and exciting, and all these things. I mean, when the future, you come out at the end of the day, and it's just, we can probably do that. I mean, that's not a future. That's a probability. That's a business plan. That's a strategic management. That's all of the other things. But really, when you look at it from a holistic part, and the part of the thing is a fracturing of the futures. Every company has its own future. Every person has their own future. Every country has their own future, blah, 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 blah. Every climate zone. I mean, so there has to be a value system. And, for me, it is, if we build a future for lack of a better metaphor, a healthy planet, then everything that scales underneath that, scalar system and falls down naturally has to be in support of that. And, if humans are working now to make a healthy planet as part of their job, well, that's got to be better than, sleeping underneath your desk. So things have to, So, I mean, those things sort of have to, and I think that's the thing about why I like the philosophical posthumanist approach. It attacks the norms. It attacks the everyday accepted facts that go on. And it says, hey, if everybody in the room agrees with this, well, it's probably a good thing to have a look at and find out what actually powers it. Where is the power structure? What makes it go? And one of the tools I use, it's what I mentioned earlier, this causal layered analysis. I use it on myself because it's a fantastic tool to figure out where you're going in life. But it looks at things of what we say every day. I mean, what happens in the media, the press, the pseudoscience, the water cooler talk. None of that layer. And the next layer is your social structural layer. What impact have we made in the world that holds those systems in place, bus schedules, work environments. Employing Microsoft Office in your office is a structural issue. You can't use some software that may be more innovative because it doesn't work with this particular, nothing against Microsoft other than, it is sort of the behemoth of everything, but it stops a lot of innovation happening in that system. Rules, regulations, I got to be up at 5 to make my 9 o'clock job because I got to take all these things. So that structurally changes my day. So all these structures in place, worldviews. Well, an office worker, what is he? What's a civil servant? Here's a perfect example. They make government run, and they keep our checks in place and everything else. But the most maligned people, that's when we take away their jobs, because the worldview of them is such that they're parasites that live in the government, and it just very, especially in the Western cultures and in North America sort of places. And those people are, like, I don't know if anybody admits that they are one, but they're very proud of what they do and they're very good at what they do. And then the metaphors we live on, technology is a tool. AI is always smarter than the human. I mean, who said that? Where did that come from? I mean, why is an AI actually intelligent? Why is it smarter than me? It's faster. It has access to more information. It can do it better. No, not better. It can do it more efficiently, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that any more than me that I'm going to give you the right answer. It's going to be both shaped by a bias. The bias that's in the machine and the bias that's in my head. My biases are shaped very much by posthumanism and my traits of education, beliefs in it, my use of technology, and my experience in being, in the military. Those sort of things all shape my biases. So all that to go to say is we probably the next steps for me and what I'm writing about is to challenge everyday conventions, everyday thinking processes, everyday ways of approaching problems and expected and accepted solutions to problems. If there's a solution that everybody goes, yeah, that's perfect, that's I can sell that, then it's probably something that needs to be turned upside down and rock flipped over to see what lives underneath it. And then we talked about you talked briefly about computers, Louise, about gauging, whether they're telling the truth. How often, when you're in a coaching role or in a mentorship role, does the person actually tell you all the truth first time around? Very, very rarely. There's always a holdback. The stuff that actually is driving the behavior is usually buried several layers deep, and it takes a lot of time to dig that out and trust and everything else.
Yeah, and sometimes people are unconscious of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a long while. Our AIs, there yet? There'll be that person. Maybe I'll be willing to tell those deep secrets to a machine rather than the person. But those things are not being explored, and those are the type of things that I guess the philosophy, I guess to say this, if you really believe it's true and always has been true and it's a social norm, we should be looking at it and we should be taking it apart by layer by layer by layer, and then saying, oh, that's a good one, I like that one, and no, that's a good one, we'll keep that one. Or, oh, well, what happens if we change this? How many new avenues of behavior and opportunities to think about the future open up when I take it apart? That's my soapbox.
Thank you, Ralph. It's a good soapbox. Gina, any last thoughts before we wind this down?
I love what Ralph said about the causal layer analysis, and I was wondering, Ralph, if I know you do a lot of work with that, if you recommend for our listeners resources that they can use to learn more about that tool, that framework.
Well, see, you opened up for me to give a blatant plug. Recently, we just published a book called CLA 3.0, 30 Years of Transformative Research, and it's a collection of case studies, and I just happen to have one here because I was referring to it earlier today. Collection of case studies broken down into 4 or 5 different layers. Sohail Inatullah the founder of causal layered analysis, does an intro to it, and he has a couple articles in it. If you're interested in getting into CLA, it is a great way to start. And you can buy it through Meta Futures, and there's right now it's the third volume, and if you buy the bundle, you get a 50% off. So I mean, but if you're interested in that stuff, that is a great starting point because it goes right through every part of it.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ralph. It's such an enjoyable conversation, and I always know when it's a good one for me because I've got little light bulbs popping all over the place. It's really interesting. Thank you. And Gina, thank you as ever. Really, really great to get your perspective too.
Thank you, Louise. It was enjoyable and a really important topic. So thank you both.
Thanks all for having me.